I have my fan club in the front row. It always feels good. So this talk is called Enforcing Angular Best Practices in an AI World. We've heard just like a tiny bit about AI today, like just a few talks, right? My name is Lara. I work for Cisco. I'm a host on the Angular Plus show. If you're not a current subscriber, you should definitely do that. We talk to a lot of people from the community. If you have suggestions for topics, hit me up. I'd love to know who you want to have on our podcast. I'm an Angular GDE, an NX champion, and I've got Angular courses on Pluralsight and on LinkedIn Learning. When you watch those, I get money, so go do that. All right. I've abandoned a ton of repositories on GitHub, so you can go judge me for those. And you can reach out to me on LinkedIn or Blue Sky. So the reason I wrote this talk is because a lot of us are in this position right now. We've got VPs out there promising that all of our code is going to be written by AI. In fact, 2,000% of it, right? I've got teammates that literally say this stuff like in meetings to upper management. And it scares me a little bit, right? Because while I am a team player, the AI code that gets generated for me looks a little like this. I'm like, why are we doing a require in the middle of my test block? Or, hey, can you help me write a function to extract a file name? And wait, why did you delete that code? Right? Or my favorite, this came from my teammate Eric. If you can't read that, it says 1 test suite failed, 4 tests failed, and fantastic, all of your tests are now passing. So clearly it's accurate, right? It turns out that working with AI assistants is a lot like working with really, really eager and overconfident interns. Not just like one of them, like a lot of them, and they're different every single day. You have to remember that coding assistants, LLMs, they're trained against a lot of knowledge across languages and frameworks. They've trained against a lot of patterns, and some of those patterns have been downvoted on Stack Overflow. AI assistants are not deterministic. You can give the exact same prompt and get completely wildly different results. And if you do not provide clear instructions and watch what's coming out, right, your assistants are going to improvise to satisfy the request, which means hallucination, which means making up methods that actually don't exist. Because at the end of the day, they live to serve us. We get slightly different versions of AI tools every time we open a new window, right? Anywhere from lawful good all the way to chaotic evil. So a little bit of chaos is good, right? Some variation, that's why we like these AI tools. They can help us solve problems by suggesting patterns that maybe we haven't thought of before. Or you can get an assistant that for some reason just wants to touch all the white space in every single file. Or just go ahead and delete random code for no reason, right? So we need to know how we can get better results out of our AI tools. We've seen a lot of talks about that today, and a lot of them are like, I don't know about you, that's not what I'm doing every day. Like, I don't have time to be a pipeline engineer, right? We're not there yet. So the reality on the ground is that we have a lot of tools we can choose from as developers. This list is not inclusive, and I guarantee by the end of the day, there's going to be more on this list, right? It seems like every day, every week, new tools are coming out. I had to pick a tool. I'm going to talk specifically to CoPilot today. That's what I was first using at work. That's what I have the most experience with. I think a lot of you have probably used it as well. That is not saying it's the best tool. It's just saying I got 20 minutes, so I got to talk about one. So it's also really important to understand these AI tools are in active development. There are new features that are being released every day, every week, and the exact setup might change between releases. Stuff you learned last week might not be relevant this week. The important thing is the underlying concepts exist, and they tend to exist across most tools. So you've heard people talking about rules for like cursor. In CoPilot, they're called instructions, right? So we might call it something slightly different. It's kind of how signals are called different things across the JavaScript ecosystem. But those underlying concepts are there. It's just the nomenclature might change, and where you put these things might differ depending on what tool you're using. So I'm going to use CoPilot. I'm just going to use GTP 4.1, and I'm going to start with a prompt that says, I want to create a view that displays dog breeds in a card view, right? Because this is a live demo, I went ahead and took screenshots because AI is not deterministic, so there's no guarantee that it's going to spit out what I want to demonstrate today. But in this case, we can see that my tool is using the deprecated ng-conf structural directive. And that makes a lot of sense, right? Because Angular's been around since 2010. In 2016, version 2 was released. So ng-conf, there's a lot of documentation using ng-conf, and there's not as much using the built-in control flow. Now, I could give this more information. I could try again, right? But as Michael talked about earlier today, every time you prompt, you're kind of building, building, building. So I want it better out of the gate. So I might try to use a different model. There's a lot of models to choose from. We've got Google Gemini, the GPT models. There's so many out there. Of course, this list is not exhaustive, and they're versioned, right? For example, for CoPilot, they offer recommendations, which I find helpful to help me kind of choose to say, OK, I'm trying to do this very specific task. Can you help me pick something that might be a little more relevant? Right, so I can get recommendations. And if I use, so I'm going to use Claude Sonnet. So I'm going to try that. And unfortunately, it's still using that deprecated ng-conf directive. However, it's using the signal-based input. So it's like getting a little closer, right? When you choose an LLM to use with your AI tool, it's important to remember not all models are free, or they come with like free or like sort of higher graded requests. If you're in a position where your company only gives you so many requests, that's something you need to be concerned about. It's great to try different models to get better output. You're going to get different responses out of different models. And the best way to crowdsource that is to open a space among your team. So on my team, we have a space dedicated to our experiences using AI code gen. And so we share like, hey, you know what? Claude Sonnet's doing really great with this task. It was terrible at this task. That way we can kind of crowdsource that information so that we don't have to just test every model ourselves. We can also provide additional context. We've heard a lot about that today, right? But really what that boils down to is defining your AI's persona. It needs to know what it's supposed to be good at, so it can kind of filter the patterns that it's giving you. You can provide clear instructions for various tasks, and you can also link relevant examples or resources, and we've seen some of that today. The cool thing about the Angular CLI is if you use ng-new out of the box, one of the questions it asks you is, do you want to configure AI with the best practices for your AI tool? And it's got 6 of the more commonly used AI tools that it can choose from. And what this does under the hood is that it takes the best practices document from the angular.dev/AI/develop-with-AI, and it formats it so that it works specifically with the tool that you chose. Because all of these tools, you name it slightly differently, and you put it someplace else, and it's called something different, right? But under the hood, it still reads that same markdown file. So when I have done that with my app, I run my same request, and now I'm getting the built-in control flow, which is what I wanted. Now let's take a look at what that looks like. Oops, stupid fingers. OK, this thing is going to kill me. There we go. All right. So if we look at what the instruction files actually are, it says at the top it defines the persona. That's something we talked about. It says you're an expert in TypeScript, Angular, and scalable web application development. And then it goes on to provide best practices. Now these are very succinctly worded and very specific. Like Mark talked about earlier in the day, these have been tested, these instructions, right? Oops. And then what we can see here is, oh, hey, look, it says use native control flow instead of the structural directives. I can add to this instruction list if I want to. I can go in if something's not relevant to me, like maybe we're not ready to use on push, I can take that out. But I can also, OK, so let's see what that looks like when I use my agent. So I've opened CoPilot, and I'm going to add, I want to create a view that displays dog views and a card view, and I push go. And the first thing this is going to do is read those instructions into the context. So you can be sure that you've got it in the right place if it shows up there. Now I'm going to stop this because Who knows what it's going to do? All right. Not willing to take that chance, y'all. So we've added that context. Now I could also add a file by clicking on this little paperclip guy here, and my list of files would show up here. These are the ones I've had open recently, but you could add in, if you have an example component that you like the pattern for, you can add that in as context and say, follow the patterns as defined in this file to write better code for you. I do that a lot with spec files because I hate how our assistant tends to write test files. Okay, so speaking of test files, I can also provide instructions that are scoped to specific files. So in CoPilot, in the GitHub directory, I have an instructions directory, and I've got a file called unittest.instructions.markdown. The instructions.markdown file extension is, and where it's located is sort of the special sauce. But this is scoped. So I've got metadata up here that sets this apply to property. So it's .spec.ts or test files. And then it's giving instructions that apply to my repository. I want to make sure that we don't use before each. We use a setup function. We want to make sure those patterns are followed. In theory, this will get picked up anytime you're working on a spec file. You can also manually add it in the same way you would with another file by clicking Add Context up in Instructions. You can see your instructions are here. So that way you don't have to have all of the context in every single request all the time. The next thing that you can do is there are a lot of tasks that we perform that we do on repeat, right? So for example, if we make a new library, we need to have a README in it. We need to know what it does, what it's for, and we usually are pretty formulaic about it. We want them to be approachable. We actually want our AI tools to be able to use our READMEs. So I can create reusable prompts as well. So in the prompt directory, I've got a prompt.markdown file. And this is specific for creating READMEs. It gives instructions for how the tool should go ahead and start writing a README. The first thing it says is ask which library or project you're generating the README for. So if I start a new window, it's going to undo that. If I start with a /, we see that my generate README file is available. So my prompt is there. To make this run, I just click go. And it's going to start by asking me which project I want to write the README for. So I would enter that in, and then it would do the work for me. The final piece that I like to optimize, or that we use on a fairly daily basis, are custom chat modes. So in CoPilot, we have agentic mode, ask, or edit. But you can also configure a custom chat mode by clicking the add button here. This will just go through and create a boilerplate one for you. I've got one already added called accessibility chat mode. So basically, this is providing the tools and the context that the tool needs to write better accessible code. So to enter into accessibility chat mode, all I have to do is select it because I have added it through that process to add it. And so then when any requests I make through that, it should be following more rules that write better accessible code. Okay. So we've learned a few more rules about how we can commit. So we can commit these instructions and rules to the repository, right? You can share them at the organization level, you can share them at your repository level, or you can keep them just for yourself. You can use apply tools to scope to specific file types, and you can use existing files as examples. We write a lot of READMEs. We actually refer to our READMEs in a lot of our instruction files, because I don't want to keep duplicating that effort. And we also have our teams support CoPilot, Cursor, and Windsurf, and each of those setup is a little bit different. So I don't want to have to repeat myself in each of those places. Okay, so we can add more customization by adding custom prompts or workflows. We can add custom chat modes. We've heard a lot about MCP servers. Minko talked about some, Michael talked about some, Devin talked about some, right? There's a lot of ways to get more context into our AI tools so that we can get better responses out of the gate as opposed to having to keep begging the AI tool to please don't delete my code. All right. So the prompt and the instructions, and there are examples of instructions, prompts, and chats available at this GitHub repository, Awesome CoPilot. It's a good place to get started. They actually provide instructions and prompts for other frameworks and languages as well, which is great. But we also have to remember we're still dealing with a tool that's non-deterministic, right? I really want lawful good, but I might not get lawful good. Every time I open that window, it might be something different. Some of the choices that we make as developers can affect the output of our AI assistants, right? We can succeed better as a team, and this is just good practice in general. So worst case scenario, it doesn't help you get better AI-generated code, but it helps your team go faster, right? Because you can follow clear, repeatable code patterns. Create clearly defined architecture and naming conventions. Your tools are going to do a better job of putting your code where it belongs and giving it the name it needs if you've got that clearly defined in your repository, and provide that clear documentation. You need not only machine-readable documentation, your AI tools need to be able to read it, but your human developers also need to be able to read it. So Chaotic Evil Man wants to know if we should use AI for everything. And I say, no, Chaotic Evil Man. I don't like to use AI with configuration. I find it does a terrible job. It very rarely gets things exactly right, and I end up spending more time fixing what it broke. Maybe you haven't had that experience, but that's been mine. It's also really important to remember that AI does not create deterministic code, but generators and executors do. So if you already support a suite of like NX plugins, you don't need AI to make libraries for you if you have a code generator that makes libraries for you, right? So we still use and heavily rely on our code generators and our code executors. And there's always tasks you can complete faster without AI. Like when we first, we had people saying you should use AI for everything. Like, would you get a calculator out to add 2 + 2 together? I mean, maybe. I guess it depends if you have a headache or not, right? Like, oh my God. Like, I have done some embarrassing math on a calculator. But there are definitely tasks, like, oh, hey, there's a typo in this template. It's going to be easier for me to just open it up and fix it. I really don't need to ask AI to help me with that. But I did promise actual enforcement, right? So even though we can do things on the front end to try to get AI to generate better code for us, we still have to enforce that that code is actually worthy. It turns out that those automated quality tests that we put into our CI/CD pipeline are now more important than ever before. Type checking, linting, static code analysis, unit end-to-end tests, all of these things matter more than they ever have before. So out of the box, Angular is in strict mode, right? TypeScript does type checking for us. So if you want to be lawful, technically you legally can disable strict mode, but it's evil. You're the evil octopus if you do that. You're actually shooting yourself in the foot too, because then if AI hallucinates a property or a method on your type, you won't catch it as easily. Angular ESLint is awesome. The lint rules are deterministic, so the code is either going to pass or fail. So I have to watch as a code reviewer for lint ignores. If somebody ignores a lint rule, I want to know why they did it. The Angular ESLint library supports rules for both TypeScript files and for templates. These enforce Angular modern best practices. If you don't have these enabled, you should look at them and figure out which ones you can enable in your repository, because these do help not only your AI tools write better modern Angular, they also help your human developers as well. And you can also create custom rules for your repository to enforce the patterns that matter to your team. So you can do code formatting is important. It's easier for me to review code if it's formatted sort of the same all the time. So prettier makes sense. Something like Sonar, you can do static code review, which can catch missing code coverage. It can point out security issues or just like cyclomatic complexity, that kind of stuff, right? But it turns out if you're an NX Power Pack or enterprise user, you can also create and enforce conformance rules. So if that is something that applies to you, or if you're interested in that, definitely go visit the NX table. Michael talked about how they apply conformance rules to their code in their pipeline as well. Unit testing, you have to be very wary of code that's both written and tested by AI. It turns out that it can very much solve your problem and then solve its own problem. Like, oh, well, I have to satisfy my user by writing a test, like writing code that passes the test. So I'll just change the test so it passes, right? I actually really like to use TDD to use for code generation. I'm not very good at describing in English sentences what I want my coding assistant to do for me. It's a lot easier for me to write. So if I'm writing a utility function, I'll create a suite of unit tests that says, here's my expected input This is what I expect to come out. Help me implement it to satisfy these tests. It actually works really great because, like I said, I'm really not good at being like, I want to write a function that blah, blah, blah. I get exhausted, and then I end up writing terrible prompts. You can also add and enforce lint rules for unit tests to prevent tests without expects and other common testing no-nos. I found that our AI tools love to subscribe and then put expects inside subscribes in unit tests, and those tests pass because they never run. That expect never runs. And it's also really important to remember that quantity is not the same as quality. AI tools are verbose. They will write unit tests forever if you ask them to, and a lot of those tests are very low quality, and they don't actually test the things that we need to test. So I spend a lot of time, that's actually where I spend a lot of time sort of poring over those unit tests to make sure that we're actually getting the kind of coverage that we want and the quality of tests that we want. And then we get to the connecting all the parts pieces. We need to verify that all of our connection points work as expected, that our full stack works. It's very easy for an AI tool to say, oh, hey, I maybe don't work with this endpoint, so I'll just change something about this service so that this code works for me. But then you go to run it, and it doesn't actually work with the endpoint because your tool changed something. And then it's important to have smoke tests before deployment because that can prevent embarrassing mistakes. Because we're all human, and it's easy to let things slip. If you're an NX Cloud customer, you can leverage AI-powered self-healing CI to help keep your code quality shipshape. So that's a tool you can use basically if your CI pipeline is failing. It can help you get that passing again. So it's kind of like making AI dog food its own code. And then I heard something about Angular CodeGen Web Scorer today. So, maybe somebody needs to check that out. So I review every PR like it's been written by a developer I know nothing about. I've worked with my team for almost 4 years, right? I love them, I trust them, I know they're excellent developers, and when they use AI tools, sometimes the code isn't as great, right? What I've noticed as a tech lead is the code quality has gone down as we've implemented more and more AI tools, and it's because it's easy to get lazy, right? And so I always review code as though I don't know who this developer is that wrote it and is submitting it. Because at the end of the day, when mistakes happen, it's going to be your name on the Git blame. It doesn't matter if AI wrote that code for you. Your name is on the commit. If you approve the PR, your name is on the approval. And at 2 a.m., if something goes wrong, you're either going to be the one on the call or you're going to be the one on the list. So that's all I have for you today. I'm ending it with the cat pirate. Thanks for listening. There are a few links in the slide deck, so check those out. If you haven't had a chance to talk with the amazing sponsors that we have out in the hallway, make time to do that tomorrow. Say thanks to all the people that take the time to speak and organize, because it's not easy. And, just have a good rest of the conference.
Awesome job.